book discussion, Hernan Diaz, In the Distance. I think it's a book that encompasses a couple of great American narratives. Jack London, John Steinbeck, John Kerouac, Cormack McCarthy, just to name a few. I think this is, even Moby Dick is in this novel. So I think what Hernan's doing here, and I don't know his background, I think he has a literary background, but what he's doing here is really sort of putting together, in a succinct way, he's putting together the ultimate American narrative. The immigrant who comes to America, goes west to the gold rush, and then encounters humans, the evil and the good of humans, right and wrong, and then nature. And at the end, he ends up going west. This is the symbolic ultimate American novel in that sense. And I think the only reason this is a good book, I recommend the reading of this book. However, I think the one thing that's missing here, there's a little bit of it's a lack of novelty. Let me say it that way. So, but other than that, kudos to Hernan Diaz. Great book. I've read his other book, Trust. This one's better. Both are good. He's a good writer. He should be read. This is not even a podcast. It's October 19th, 2022. This is Cryptalco. For the day, the fund is up 10 basis points. The market's down 60 basis points. For here, we are down 47.2%. The market is down 22.6%. We're outperforming by 24.6%. Tesla just announced earnings. They're in line. EPS a little lighter than expected, just a few cents. The stock is down a couple of percent after hours. I think that's why. Overall, very good quarter, of course, a record quarter, record earnings, record sales, everything is fantastic. Given the circumstances Tesla has to deal with, particularly in China, I think there's just concern about the future of demand in particular, and also ASPs that are sort of holding back the stock right now. We'll see what happens in the call, but the shareholder deck is very encouraging. Continuous guidance of 50% growth over time. And maybe no new particular information about the Cybertruck, which is also a little bit hanged out. But let's see what they say on the call. Book discussion, Hernan Diaz, In the Distance. For new listeners, why are we doing this? Why are we talking about book discussions here at the Not Even Wrong podcast? Well, the purpose of the podcast is to give people a sense for what it feels like to run a hedge fund. And reading books is not just a pastime of hedge fund managers. It is part of the business. It is very important because we consider reading conditioning of the mind. Same way an MMA fighter has to do conditioning, other than learning about specific skills, they have to train. Same for any other, like a soccer player has to do conditioning. The same with us. There's certain skills that we acquire, certain research that we have to do, certain meetings we should be having in order to make money. But then we also have this necessity, like everybody else, to condition our mind, to be able to add flexibility, intelligence, knowledge creation in general is the process of creativity, and that while we don't understand exactly how it works, I think we have a good understanding of how we can foster it, and reading books is certainly part of that journey, and that's why we think reading books is important. We also like to keep a record of what we're reading. So let's talk about the book, Hernan Diaz, In the Distance. It's a book about a boy that comes to the United States during the gold rush in the mid-19th century, goes to San Francisco, and then encounters a lot of bad things and good things and all kinds of stuff. But in general, I would say there's certainly the theme of fighting nature. This is, I would call this book a succinct narrative of the ultimate American narrative. So it just combines all the big themes that American literature has had over the last 150 years. Exploration of the West, going west, finding opportunity, finding love, looking for something, like having purpose in life. So this is an important part. Conquering nature. I mean, ever since Moby Dick, the can-do environment that the United States encompasses has been internalized in literature. I think Hernan is doing this particular tradition a lot of justice in allowing his character to go through extraordinary situations, conquering nature, conquering fundamental questions of the relationship between a man and nature. Survival, of course, is part of the theme. There's love, not too much, but there's love. But I think the theme here, this is more of a Jack London type narrative of a naturalist character, where the character goes through life uh, dealing with nature in a way that it becomes second nature. This is the key. I think one of the takeaways as a reader is that you realize how cookie cutter our life is today, how detached from nature we are, and how easy it is to get back into nature. This boy, this particular character, Lacan, in the book is certainly a perfect example of that. So this would be one of the, I think, biggest takeaways from the book is, again, the narrative of nature ever since Jack London is very, very strong. And I think, again, if I had to do sort of the tree here, it starts with Moby Dick, then we have Jack London, and then we have a lot of other writers. I mentioned John Steinbeck. Now, what is the Steinbeckian thing here? I think the one thing that reminds me of Steinbeck is Of Mice and Men, because this character, Lacan, he has a little bit of that, or even Dostoevsky's The Idiot. So he's the sort of ignorant giant of humanity, if you want. So he's doing the right things. He's Forrest Gump in literary form. So he does the right things in many ways, and people around him get confused. Some like him, some hate him. But he certainly is not normal in that sense, that he transcends hierarchies. He transcends what's possible. He is an inspiration. He's a fear for some, and that comes across. So I would say that theme. This is not just American. I meant literature. I mentioned Dostoevsky, of course. I mean, this is certainly more than just American literature. But what's important to me is not necessarily, okay, is this now an allegory to The Idiot? Is it Of Mice and Men? Whatever. It doesn't really matter. I think there's a lot of mice and men here. There's the big giant who sometimes steps over little things and turns society against him because of that. So that's certainly a Steinbeckian theme. Cormac McCarthy, the West, the toughness of nature, the blood, the blood meridian, the red blood sunset in the West, and the deserts. The deserts are a big theme of this book, and I think anybody who's lived in the West, I'd say you have to have lived here to really understand what it means to be exposed to the deserts, to the arid climate, to the strength of the sun, all of these things, while they exist elsewhere. The American West has a certain character that is very unique about that. So I think Hernan does a great job in putting all these things together. And this is this is a book that you could read in high school and spare yourself a lot of other books. Of course, I don't recommend that. I'm just saying it just has this encompassing narrative of the American West. Now, what are the specifics I want to take away here? I think information is theory law, and so we all have different interpretations of the same type of material. In other words, I will have different takeaways from this book than you or anybody else. So I want to give you my personal sense, and I think optimism comes to mind first. Optimism, even though the story is actually not very happy, there is optimism, and the story ends, without giving too much away, the story ends with the main character going west. It's not exactly the kind of west that you might think, but he goes towards the sunset, and this is fundamental. I think no matter what, again, this is something people talk a lot about, moving to New York or Las Vegas or whatever, from California. I think no matter how bad California is, the sclerotic state and the government here and the corruption and all of these things are terrible. But the fact that we're here in the West, the fact that we face the sun every day and the sunset over the Pacific Ocean, and this hope and this energy and this optimism is very difficult to replicate elsewhere. And I think Hernan, this is a book about the West, definitely a book about the West, no question about it. 90% of the book happens in the West, and it's in the West, that the kind of West that you would expect to be as a protagonist. If you go, in California, you're part of the gold rush, and then you go to the deserts of Utah and New Mexico, and then you go back to to the California side of things. So these types of areas, again, if you've lived there, if you've traveled, like we have, and I think anybody who lives here, no matter how much you don't like driving, you will start going around, traveling around these unbelievable landscapes, and this feeling and this optimism that comes with it, I think is part of, to me, one of the most important aspect of the book. I think let's talk about the Jack London part. What is the Jack London part of the book? What I mean by that is the naturalist in this book. And with naturalist, I just mean that we humans, we take nature and we make something happen out of it. This is that very David Deutschian part of our principal stack, just to remind our reader, our listeners, is the beginning of infinity. And Deutsch, in the beginning of infinity, actually says, look, don't think that we are somehow born into this cozy lifestyle that we have. We started out in a very hostile environment somewhere in Africa as a human race, and then we built ourselves into where we are today. And the same thing we can do on Mars, the same thing, we can do anything. We are a universal problem-solving machine, and this comes across in this book. I don't think Hernan necessarily had this in mind. This is my interpretation, coming from a compute background, coming from an investor background, sitting here in Silicon Valley. I'm optimistic. I look at the world from okay, what can compute solve? Because that's where wealth creation happens. And in this particular book, there's no compute. This is a 19th century book, but it's still the ability to solve problems, universal problem-solving machine. That's what humans are. That's what this main character is. And he solves problems, in particular when it comes to nature. I mean, just without giving too much away, let's say he's in the desert with nothing, no water, no food, no money, of course, nothing, and he survives. He survives because he knows how to survive. There's a scene in the book towards the end when a trapper who meets him notices the excellent work that this particular protagonist Wakan did when he trapped animals and made clothes out of the skin, the fur, and all that. And that's just a testimony of excellence. Again, no matter where you're stuck in life, you're a universal problem-solving machine, and Hernan's book really brings that across beautifully. Another theme that is very strong in the book, the John Kerouac type, let me go and find my way through life without being part of the establishment. In fact, avoiding the establishments. There's certainly roots of hippie culture here, although this particular protagonist doesn't have the religious aspects of hippie culture, sort of maybe the contemporary kale eating, no meat, gluten-free type. He doesn't have any of that stuff, but there is the roots of that, because it's again you give the shoulder, you show the shoulder. How do you say, the cold shoulder is a German expression, but I guess listeners don't know what I mean with that. To establishment, I can do it by myself. I am my own person. What happens in my head is what defines my reality. Those are the kinds of things that I think Hernan really strongly suggests with this character. And again, this is something I take away as a reader, and you might not, but that's okay. That's what reading does. That's why we think reading is so important, because it conditions your mind, it trains you, it creates a muscle of thinking about, let's say, problems, thinking about information. This is a muscle we have to train, and reading is how we train this muscle. So to summarize, In the Distance, Hernan Diaz, it's a great book. It's a succinct combination of several fundamental archaic or archetypical, that's the word, archetypical American narratives. It's the can-do, the nature conquering can-do guy who goes west in search of opportunity, but much more importantly, in search of purpose. This particular character has purpose. He's in search of somebody. I don't want to talk about that now in detail, but there is always purpose. And whenever the question of purpose comes up, there's a clear answer, which is, in the end, ultimately, the purpose is to survive. If you don't have any other purpose, then purpose of survival is purpose too. Again, very optimistic. There's no such thing as depression here. There's no space for that in Hernan's writing, and I think that's very, in my view, very optimistic. I think Hernan's an optimistic writer, even in his book Trust. He leaves you with optimism, even though he shows you bad things human deception and all kinds of bad things happening in his books, there's always this optimism because the human is a universal problem-solving machine, and the optimism comes from the purpose, and even survival is a purpose. Hopefully, we have more than that. We have things like love, relationship between humans, very important. I think that also comes across in the book, how sensitive our relationships are with fellow humans and how important they are. And I think finally I want to just say that this book is, in a sense, a narrative way of the American narrative. And for anybody who is not living in the United States, I think it's worth reading this book because it does encompass the ultimate American narratives, which are all about conquering nature, the can-do nature of this country, the can-do nature of the spirit and the mindset of the people here, which is the ultimate fountain of wealth creation and progress. Thank you.